everyone. Welcome back to another season of Parallel Barkings. Woof, woof. My name is Larry Backer, and I'm here with my puppy.
Arf, arf, Ariana Backer.
And we are delighted to welcome you to our 2023 season 4, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Season 4, we
amazing.
made it. We did
We
it.
made it. We made
did
it. And of course, there's lots to talk about. The year ended with a bang. And in a sense, that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yes.
And there's sure to be lots and lots of interesting things to talk about. Today, we're going to talk about drones. And we're going to talk about Iranian drones, both the suicide drones, the surveillance drones, and the like that have been manufactured in Iran, sent to Russia and then used by the Russians for all kinds of things, including, and of course, we can only say that it's alleged until it's actually proven through the mechanics of national and international law, used in a violation of human rights law, humanitarian law, and likely the laws of war, causing great destruction, harm, and terror. That's well known. What apparently has now been reported and has raised some eyebrows is something that has been a subject of increasing concern to the security services of Western powers and those who are opposed to the Russian invasion, and that is the way in which ordinary products, everyday products, now appear to be components and used in the building of something that is fairly innocuous. I can't count the number of families that have something like a drone, and then taking this drone and then repurposing it for the purpose of causing great harm, which is cognizable not only in law, but to some extent substantially immoral. And this is what's going on here. So the Ukrainian government apparently was able to take a drone apart that was downed, and I think it was downed last fall, and they removed 52 components from, I think it was the Iranian Shahed 136 drone. All of this is reported in CNN. We don't have the original documentation, and no shock there. But as soon as we get our hands on it, we may talk about this some more. So the Shahed 136 drone, and of the 52 components, 40 appear to have been manufactured by 13 American companies. The remaining 12 were manufactured by companies in Canada, Switzerland, Japan, and in China, as well as in Taiwan. Right, and so you put all of these together, no shock, the Chinese, of course, supporting the Russians, and now with a growing number of mutual trade, friendship, and solidarity agreements between China and Iran. It's not surprising, but at first blush, you would think, well, it's really surprising that a good chunk of the components, 40, probably, close to 90 or so percent of them were components that were manufactured by companies whose states have imposed, to some greater or lesser extent, substantial sanctions and trade restrictions against both Iran and to a different but substantially perhaps greater effect, although it's hard to quantify which is a greater bundle of sanctions, the Russians. Right, and so one begins to worry about this, and what it does is bring up, I think, a number of intertwining issues, most of which are easier to state than they are to solve. This isn't one of these discussions where we can say, aha, someone has done something stupid, and it's a simple matter of getting them not to do something stupid in compliance with whatever it is that we're supposed to be in compliance. In a sense, quite the reverse. So what do you think?
I think that it is no surprise that electronic components, are going to be found in weapons from other
Well, it's
countries.
probably not just electronic components. It could be everything, gears, the
Any
molding
kind
of
of
the drone.
any kind of components,
Right,
semiconductors, GPS,
right,
anything. It's not, I mean,
right.
I'm
But
sure
these aren't,
people
and
who listen to this podcast have seen Marvel movies and know who Tony Stark is. His it's like that kind of archetype, that trope where some brilliant mind creates this technology and it gets into the
well,
hands of it just gets into it. It it's not even that. It's just you get, it raises questions of how far in the supply chain um is a company responsible for monitoring
right.
the regulation of their products internationally. And that raises questions about um you know sovereignty, questions over sovereignty when you extend those questions over regulations. And then you think about, okay, well, if we're regulating there, we have this whole huge idea about capitalism and
Oh my
freedom.
God, you had to go to the C word. You know,
Yeah.
that's gonna make me crazy.
Well, I mean,
One,
you
because
if it's
it,
not me, it's going to be someone else.
oh my God, that word should be
Um,
purged from the English language because it has not only been so overused, but now distorted to the point where it's become a meaningless term. But I
freedom
get
to
your point.
conduct business. But that's what that
Markets, markets,
mark
markets.
yes, markets. Like the free market.
We're
um
not talking about the ownership structure of the means of production. We're talking about the means by which things are made and distributed and sold. But I get your point. But so here's my thing. You're absolutely right. And I wish that we were talking about Tony Stark. But it's much more pathetic than that. That's what makes this story really interesting. We're not talking about Iron Man's suit,
of course,
right?
these are just really small, not interesting, fun
These
things.
are lawnmowers that kill, right? And
I mean,
that's the
I was trying
problem.
to make it fun. It's not fun.
Well, no, I know, I wish it were Iron Man suits because then it would be much more interesting. You know, the great genius of Western capitalist free market society coming up with these incredibly esoteric and really precious objects, which are then either purloined or cynically sold in an avaricious market and then wind up as part of these even more elaborate killing machines by these nefarious villains, taking us back to the 19. You go back to Marvel, and because I'm 4,000 years old, I go back to Dr. No and the first set, or Goldfinger and the first set of 007 movies with these fabulous, and M, right? The old M instead of the new M, although I like the new M too. Right? This garden of the fabulous. But it isn't. And that would be easy because we'd be able to identify that. And in fact, we do, right? So if you've got, highly sophisticated nuclear technology, it's very clear that it is going to be much more difficult for it to wind up in an Iranian drone. But what happens if basically you're selling gears? You're selling drones. And in fact, here's the apocryphal scenario. You're selling the same drones or the same drone technology that you find on the catalog of some sad, like almost no-tech store that little Bobby or Susie gets for their 10th birthday so that they can stick a camera on it and then zoom around the
Yeah.
neighborhood taking pictures, right? But all of a sudden, that's what you have. The Iranians then come in, and as far as we know, either through Chinese technology or Russian technology, or the Russians themselves will then add value, something like a bomb or explosives. And then all of a sudden, something that's innocuous like this, which is now used this way, now becomes something that is that's deadly, but it raises a problem that you raise, and that's what makes it both more pathetic and more difficult.
Right. How do you in reality, in actuality, how do you track that in
Well, how
your
do you know what to track is the first
product?
question. How do you know what to
Exactly.
track, right? So
What
are you going to track gears? These are components. We're not even selling drones. That's
Yeah,
the sad
what
thing.
is it that you are looking for first?
Right. I
How
mean,
do
you
you
know,
know what
and
to
it could be
look
even
for?
worse. It could be even worse. What happens if what you have are the nuts and bolts, literally the screws were manufactured in Taiwan or in Japan, right? And the molding for the drones were bought as just parts. All of them are replacement parts for 5 or 6 different models of drones that you can get all over Europe, the US, Japan, Latin America, and Africa, right? How do you deal with that? Worse, what happens if all of these components are being sold in Zimbabwe, right? And once they're sold, there's an active secondary market, and Iranians will go down to the markets in Zimbabwe or Tanzania or Bolivia.
Well, that's what I'm
And
saying. The
right,
secondary, the tertiary
right.
markets, are the companies responsible for tracking those as well? And then the final products afterward, figuring out they would the final product would have to be tracked. That's
Right. The
that's
final,
the only way.
yeah. But this links up to two things that is worth noting, because there is an architecture to deal with this. The problem is this really shows the limiting case. And here we're about to see this enormous clash between 3 different regulatory regimes, all of which are precious to liberal democracy, right? And to the stability of a rules-based international order. The first, right, is the principles of globalization, which is founded on and which derives its strength from the notions that, at least with respect to innocuous goods, right, there ought to be a robust set of mechanisms to foster free movement of goods, of capital and investment in them, so that all peoples everywhere could benefit from all of those goods, and then ultimately global collective welfare will increase. That had been the genius behind what becomes the system of globalization put into force in 1945, and then ramped up after 1989, and with its apogee in the second decade of the century. And then, all hell's broken loose and we don't know what's going on. But the idea is still there. So you got this, which is all open, especially with respect to what we viewed as innocuous goods. And the notion is then, well, there'll probably be these classes of goods where sovereignty, like you said, sovereignty and national security may require you to be more judicious in allowing them into these global flows, right? And that had been the idea. So that's very narrow. Globalization is very big. But after 2015, after 2001, and then it ramps up after 2010, right? We have another set of regimes. One is human rights regimes, right? And human rights regimes are ones in which we've effectively increasingly governmentalized the private sector, especially enterprises, and we've told them, look, you bear a responsibility both with respect to your internal operations and with respect to your products to ensure that, to the extent of your ability to control this or to foresee where things are going to go bad, you have an obligation to ensure to prevent its misuse, or to prevent acting in ways that are human rights harming, or to mitigate if you can't prevent, and in any case to remedy these harms. And that's a general view, but in the case of the Russo-Ukrainian war, it becomes far more targeted when you add to it the notion of complicity, that your responsibility extends not just for minding your own house, but for being aware about how your products, your labor, your location, your actions and activities, your financing will either facilitate a state or other groups with whom you're dealing or in whose country you are operating will commit human rights wrongs, including gross violations of human rights, the laws of war,
Well, right.
humanitarian law, and
And
the
that's
like.
why I was bringing,
Right.
I'm glad you said
Or,
that. That's
right,
why I was bringing up the fact that it would be incredibly difficult to track these.
right. But it gets more complicated. Let me just finish the
Okay,
last thing. So
okay,
you've
okay,
got
okay.
this facilitation, you got human rights and facilitation and complicity, which then gives rise to both legal risk in a very narrow set of cases, but in a broader case, and we've seen this operating in the financial markets. The Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund has been somewhat energetic in doing this in private markets. That says, look, if the effect of what you're doing facilitates the commission of these human rights wrongs, in this case, Iran selling drones to Russia, which are then going to be used to kill indiscriminately Ukrainian civilians, then you're responsible for that as well. So you've got, on the one hand, globalization, openness, especially innocuous products. On the other, human rights, which says you got to worry about the effects. And then the third one, which ultra complicates this, is that increasingly we've used human rights and the stake part of globalization to punish states, this is state versus state, to punish states that we believe are violating the rules-based international order through systems of targeted sanctions, global Magnitsky regimes, which has been adopted outside the US. So we'll target people, sometimes we'll target states, and we will sanction. And by sanctioning, we will either make access to global markets difficult, or if not impossible, and we've done that with the Russians and the Iranians, or we will target specific people and make their access impossible, or we'll freeze their assets. But it also has another component, and that is anyone in or subject to control of the sanctioning state will then violate law by doing whatever it is to violate the sanctions rule. In the case of Iran and Russia, it would be engaging in, among other things, economic transactions with respect to a slew of products. Now you put all three together and you have innocuous products and you go, oh, wow, we got a loophole here. Not only a loophole, not a hole, not a loophole, a gap. But how do you plug this gap without disturbing this delicate balance between, right, globalization, which goes in one vector, human rights, which goes in another vector, and sanctions regimes as part of intergovernmental relations, and the third thing. And that's a very, very delicate thing to do. So what do? No more killer lawnmowers? Right? So the first thing you're going to say is, wow, this is bad, no more drones. Okay,
No.
well,
No, that is not what I'm going to say.
Well, I mean, that would be you're right. If I wasn't thinking, the first thing I would say is, okay, so drone, American components, bad, Iran, worse for supplying it, Russia, even worse for using them. So the easy way is to not allow this to happen, but that may require then Johnny and Susie and Belinda to no longer be able to use their drones to spy on their neighbors. I'm sorry, they don't do that. To use
Yeah, and
drones for whatever
that is
degree.
unrealistic. Also, this is just not going
Right.
to happen. And if it wasn't, I mean, they could find technology.
Right. But it's
Other
lawnmowers. It's
places.
not even the technology. This is the kind of stuff that you can make anywhere.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's not the US, it's somewhere else.
And right. And yet, right, American components, Japanese, Swiss components, Canadian components are being used. So how do you block that? There is a way, I guess. But it's a this also has
Stop
human rights
globalization.
implications.
I mean,
Well, no, to some extent, what you'd have to do is seal Iran off from the
okay,
rest of the
but
world. That is,
you're really
nothing gets in.
you're really concentrating on one country, but this applies to all countries across the world, when parts, components of, a company's making are used for, what once are, innocuous products, and then, so I don't see how
Well, I
just doing
mean,
it to
but that's
Iran.
my solution. The only way you can deal with this then is on a country basis. Iran, bad. So what we're going to do is hype up or hop up our sanctions program to effectively say no products made or under the control of American companies can be sold directly to the Iranians. But you're right. We have a globalized system. Fine, I'm not going to sell them directly to Iran, but what happens if I sell them to Zimbabwe? And the next thing I know, the biggest customer of all of these innocuous products in Zimbabwe are the Iranians or the Russians.
Yeah.
Right. And then it goes up. Yeah, but you're going to wind up sanctioning everyone. And in a sense, what you're going to do is you're going to do in a way precisely what the Americans, what do we call them, competitors, want Americans to do, is to use an overreaction to using sanctions and human rights to effectively seize up or dismantle the system of globalization.
Well, right. It's isolating ourselves, and
right. And so
that's what I said before. Do you want to
right.
stop globalization? Is that what we do?
Well, right, exactly right. So I'm underlining your point with some more detail. So how do you get out from doing this? How to avoid killer robots or killer lawnmowers? No, killer robots are easy. Killer lawnmowers, or in this case, killer drones. And I think the answer is you can't, because if we stop making them, certainly the Chinese and North Koreans and anyone else can. This
This
simple
isn't
stuff.
something you can stop, and I can't.
Right.
I'm
Now,
being a little pessimistic here, but I really don't understand why people are surprised.
Well, but you can be a little more legalistic. So, for example, if in fact you can trace the killer part of the killer drones to Iran, then we would either have to reinterpret or include provisions either in international criminal law or in national
Absolutely.
law that creates liability at some point, assuming you can ever prove this and you can get their assets.
For sure.
Right, which is a long drawn out process. It took how many decades to bring the Pol Pot regime in Cambodia to justice? It took almost a generation to sort out the Yugoslavian breakup and the gross human rights violations that occurred there. And compared to this stuff, that was just a warm up. And so the answer may be that we, in the first instance, there's not much you can do, but at some point, ought there not to be responsibility and therefore liability in someone? But if it's in someone,
for sure, there absolutely needs to be. I don't think we have the technology for understanding or getting to that detail yet. I think we should develop it. Or maybe we do, and we're just not willing to dedicate the effort or manpower directly for that purpose.
Yeah, or it may be too early. And here's the problem with the prevent, mitigate, and remedy thing. We're getting so used to seeing or putting most of our eggs in the prevention bucket that we're becoming increasingly reluctant to realize that there may be instances where and this is understood in the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, there may well be those situations where prevention isn't possible, where mitigation is unlikely to be very effective, and then the only thing you have is remedy after the fact. And in a sense, that's what the Ukrainians have been doing since the start of the invasion. They're documenting everything. There's lots of things they can't prevent, but if they can document, gather evidence, and then they take this evidence along They're being helped by civil society elements from all over the place, and then move the evidence, preserve it outside of the combat zone. There will come a moment at some point when one ought to be able to assert a remedial power against those who use this, right? But then the question is, and so here's my question to you: if we do this, ought you to be able to drag into this the component manufacturers from the US, Canada, Japan, Switzerland, Taiwan, or China? Or is this an Iranian and Russian liability?
No, it's not just, I mean, I was thinking this is a responsibility for companies. This should be a corporate social responsibility for them
Yes.
to track their own supply chain. They should track the lineage
Into
of.
the secondary markets. This is life cycle tracking. And what you're saying, by the way, has been floated by a number of civil society organizations and has been considered by a number of organizations that have rulemaking capacity. This life cycle tracking.
I don't know, that's really hard. That's really, really difficult. And that's what I was talking about, the technology to do that.
Right.
Only if.
So you'd have to track everything, including bolts, nuts,
Yeah, I mean,
metal,
if
wires.
I mean, if if the technology is prohibitively, if we're just not there yet, basically, and I just don't know if it makes sense to go to the secondary markets. But I think eventually, if we can make it pragmatic, if we can make it easier, make a tool, basically, not excruciating, I think it.
You mean expensive and complicated?
Exactly.
Okay.
I think it is definitely something that companies should and could be responsible for
Okay.
doing.
That's really interesting. So let's assume by some miracle, because the last 2 centuries have been miraculous centuries in terms of technological innovation. So I wouldn't be surprised if someday we don't get there in an efficient way. Let's assume you can do that. In
Okay.
order to get to where you're going, and I can track this all the way through secondary markets at any number of levels, right? So you can trace this through the hands of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 transactions. What
It doesn't mean that
responsibility?
you're responsible for what happens in those
Okay.
markets. You might be
Ex
responsible for notifying.
there, bullseye. Thank you. There you go. So, because if you do more than that, now you've got a big problem. Because to the extent that companies continue to have responsibility for that, then you've undone the essence of the market, which is once you negotiate a thing, you sell a wire, you sell a bolt, you no longer have control,
Yeah,
right? You can't
absolutely.
build
No.
contracts that say, oh, thank you for using the nail to build this cabinet, which now contains some kind of bomb. But now I need that nail back because I know that I can trace it to the cabinet that now has a bomb. And so pull that nail out and give it back to me. That's impossible given the way in which virtually every country on earth is structured ownership. But you hit the nail on the head. The point is not control. The point is information.
Exactly. I mean, I look at it kind of like the Securities Administration, kind of like how they do checks on people randomly. If you're signing up, let's say you're signing up for a loan, or credit, like a credit check, you'll be your information will be run up against databases, and those databases will run your information across other databases that will search to see if you hit any red flags, basically. So that's
Wow.
kind of
Wow.
like what
Wow.
those
I'm
notifications would be.
Wow. Wow. So we stand in markets, every human being stands naked before the great information vacuum suck.
Well,
There
not
is
really.
no
Those are
private,
more like
there's no privacy. There's
financial. Yeah, those are financial red flags, kind of.
yeah, but we're not talking financial red flags in order to do what you suggest, which is really the only effective way of doing this. We essentially have to be naked. Every item that is negotiated everywhere, and then you'd have to figure out at what level you don't do it, but then you create a gap, has to be sucked up into some kind of big data mechanism, which is yet to be, I think, although who knows, invented, that through the analytics of which you're able to pop up whatever it is you think you need in order to get whatever information you need for whatever purposes you need it. And the you, by you, I mean the state or some other kind of governance body. Right.
Yeah.
But wow, if I were a business, this sounds really cool, but you're going to run up against problems beyond privacy that's going to make at least some people crazy, although we may have crossed that bridge a while ago. You've got other issues, tax exposure. So now you're exposing everything. Um, tax exposure, exposure to information is information. And while it's easy, and the compelling reason is you want to avoid components in Iranian drones that kill people, you can also use this information for all kinds of other things: controlling flows of products, controlling their distribution, effectively managing markets, so that, or disrupting them
Right.
to some greater ends. And that may be in some ways as bad, if you prize individual autonomy, as finding some wires, bolts, nuts, and other things in drones that have been repurposed
Yeah,
by
that's a great point. You have to weigh the risk over reward. I don't really want to say reward, but the
benefit.
the benefit.
God, we're learning to speak administratese here. Right. But interesting set of problems. And of course, I certainly have no solution to this other than to see it. And we should have seen this coming. I mean, how many TV shows have we seen? War show. This is like a horrible episode of Evil MacGyver.
Yeah, like MacGruber.
MacGruber, that's right. There isn't an innocuous thing on Earth that cannot be repurposed to do something, explode, and sometimes for good, but sometimes for not good. And that may ultimately require us not to rethink markets, but to rethink the way in which the effects of markets can be not managed, but overseen in a way to protect ultimately the integrity of the market in the face of very deeply held values like peace, human rights, stability, prosperity, and the like, whatever the collective is on that.
Right.
And that is what we can do now, is begin to identify the contours of this problem. But I think beyond that, this is going to be a very interesting thing, and it is likely to require some very high-end analytics and some very high-end computing, and the willingness to deal honestly with core conceptual issues.
Agreed.
And beyond that, I got nothing.
I think this was a great choice for a first topic for our fourth season, first fourth season episode. That
Watch
was
those killer lawnmowers. We're
Thanks.
laughing. 3 days from now, there's going to be some article in Reuters about how they've repurposed lawnmowers as movable landmines or something. I don't know.
Yeah. See, well, I mean, it's no joke because they no longer allow people to bring anything on airplanes, and you only are allowed plasticware when eating. So I would believe anything at this point.
Well, depending on what class of ticket you
Oh,
bought.
wow. I don't even want to hear it. You
That's another podcast. That's
old
another
man.
podcast.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right. Woof, woof.
everyone. Bark,
Woof,
bark.
woof.
We'll see you later.
Bye.